Hello everyone and welcome. Make a cup of your favorite drink and get comfortable because this is a wonderful time for new stories from YellowCat. Send your own stories in the comments below and maybe they'll be in our new video. Today we have new amazing stories, so subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed yet. Let's get started. What went wrong at work that caused everyone to quit at the same time? The company conducted an employee contentment survey. It had incredibly few answers. We filled it out and made an effort to convey that while we as a team were content and doing well on the inside, nearly everyone was troubled by two other team members who were bullies in high-ranking positions. Instead, the company questioned what we could improve upon to stop the bullies from bullying. Our team was/is a cornerstone of the entire business, and over half of the team left within a month. Unheard of at that organization. A small business with a 5-person, absolutely essential programming team. CEO renovated and repainted the building for several $100,000 before deciding he didn't like the color and had it redone the following month. When the lockdown occurred and the firm began to have financial difficulties, the CEO made the decision to let off 2 of our team members. At first, we believed that he chose those 2 because they were less accustomed to the company's processes. The CEO then revealed to the other 3 of us that those 2 were in the worst financial situations, and one of them was about to give birth to another child in a few weeks. And that since they would be in a desperate situation, they might hire them back as contractors for little money. In the next week, the 3 of us chatted among ourselves, all resigned, and they had to keep the other 2 devs on with their standard paycheck for longer, all while looking for new places to work. Close friends, not my job. Checks kept bouncing because the proprietor of the restaurant wasn't paying his workforce. So they all agreed to F this one evening, shut down the business, and then departed. After social media and the traditional media took over, the owner was chased out of town. He sold the properties after closing both of his businesses. The second also saw an employee walk out the week before the first. Edit. Since people keep asking, it happened in Maryland. And the second place was his second establishment, an Indian restaurant, where a week earlier the kitchen crew had walked out, but the establishment had not yet closed. After closing his first restaurant, he sold the second one. Good riddance. I used to work at a business that sold cheap apparel while I was in college. For the first several months, the majority of the personnel worked 15 to 20 hours each week. Then we got a new manager who decided that the state-mandated paid breaks 15 minutes after 4 hours were a waste of money. So that no one would receive a paid break, he reduced everyone's shifts to 3 hours and 45 minutes or less. People started to grumble, so he hired a ton of new workers to cut back the previous personnel to just 1 shift per week. In less than a month, almost everyone who genuinely knew what they were doing was lost. I've heard that after they realized how stupidly the facility was operated, the majority of the newcomers also left quite fast. Engineers. 3 of us left the same week and without consulting one another. The man in charge was an abhorrent, insulting twaddle. As a result, the head office lost faith in the subsidiary, which led to its sale as a whole. My boss used to assemble everyone in the morning and rant about whatever came into his head first thing in the morning. He would always end his rant with, "And if you don't like it, you know where the gate is," as if he were laying down the law. The following day, when he stated it, we all agreed to turn around and head toward the gate. We were in the middle of a multi-million-pound contract, and we then demanded we get better working conditions, better overtime rate, and allowed days off if we needed it, otherwise, we all walk. They accepted our conditions, and that boss was fired. In the 1980s, I had a job at a KFC. Our manager was incredibly cool. Along with another assistant manager, I worked there along with many other fantastic young individuals. Our manager was appointed to improve the business, and he was given money to purchase new machinery. With our assistance, he also reduced the cost of paper goods and thoroughly cleaned the business. He was let go by top management at the conclusion of the year for spending too much. They then hired a new boss who started berating us all right away. Each person walked. The new guy hired his family to assist in running the business while it was closed for several days. A few years later, they permanently closed their store. I was given the opportunity to work in management by the district manager, but I simply didn't trust them at the time. Within a week or two of the incident, we all left, though not all at once. I was one of just 4 workers in the optometrist's office. Our previously small and unorganized office will now be shared by another practice that the doctor encouraged to move in. The doctor never took time out of her routine to help us with the changeover or stayed up late like we all did. We had to do all of the effort to make way for them. The practices weren't integrating in any manner, so when the new doctor arrived, he had fired all of his staff and assumed we would work for him. He only employed 1 employee, a recent high school graduate with no prior experience. Who do you suppose had to train them? Additionally, the doctor never lowered the number of appointments we attended. We continued to work hard as normal. Our patients shared a waiting room with theirs. We were quick to return with our patients, whereas they were not. They gave us strange stares and occasionally shouted at us for ignoring their needs. But we were forbidden from saying anything to them about why we ever helped only half the people who came in the door, or why we couldn't answer their questions and had to redirect them to the least knowledgeable person in the room, the other doctor's 1 employee. The doctor flatly refused to hear any of our worries. We all quit, and the practice sold out to one of the eyeglass chains a few months later. I used to work for a pizza chain. The way we cleaned and organized for the following day didn't meet with the manager's approval. We all responded by taking off our uniforms after reading a note that said something to the effect of, "You are all replaceable." We didn't even shut down or lock the doors, simply walked away. Orders were being taken over the phone, and guests were entering the dining area, but no one was working there. When she noticed that no one was present, she started calling everyone frantically and threatening to fire us if we didn't show up for work. 1 person returned and made an effort to save it. I just reminded her that I was replaceable, and so was the person who signed my check, then hung up. To replace the staff, they had to close for perhaps a week or 2. Less than a year later, the place fully went down and declared bankruptcy, at least in part because of her leadership. Now, there's a Verizon store there. You are all replaceable. Well, good luck replacing us then. Shocked Pikachu face. My boss has been talking about how he can hire managers to replace people, but when I walked out mid-shift after someone threw food at me, well, suddenly I'm not so replaceable. I had a similar story. For 3 long years, I worked at a Burger King among many others who stayed there even longer. Our favorite manager was receiving the short end of the stick from our DM, so he quit and went and got a job making pizza. They introduced this joker who is comfortable with selling terribly stale food that ought to have been thrown out, etc. Just an S show to save money. He was truly terrible, and it showed in our work. One of the guys went to the pizza place to talk to our old manager. He promised to recruit each of us. As a result, both the first and second shifts at that Burger King abruptly quit on the same day, and we continued to make pizzas. They pleaded with us to stay, but it was too late. They bulldozed that location a few years later. This reminded me of a time where this also backfired on the person. During my time in high school, I worked at a fast food restaurant that specialized in fried chicken. I used to like the majority of our managers before we brought this one on. She was skin and bones, 100 pounds soaking wet, and a raging pain in the A. We were a tad behind schedule in the drive-thru one day. This wouldn't be a problem in any other setting, but in this restaurant, timing is crucial. She appeared, told us that we might all be replaced, and then retreated to her office rather than aiding us. However, another manager learned about it and informed our GM, who then pulled the video footage of our DM and immediately dismissed her. I hope you are miserable wherever you are, Katie. What was the unpleasant incident with your HOA? My then girlfriend, who is now my wife, shared a home with some others in a neighborhood with an HOA. A parking space was set aside for visitors of the tenants. Ironically, my wife and her roommates constantly had trouble finding parking, whereas it was always easy for me to park in that lot. I simply put my visitor's permit on. I probably stayed the night once or twice a week, and one morning I discovered my car was gone. I eventually discovered that my 5-speed manual Honda, which was then 10 years old, had simply been hauled, not stolen. When I reached out to the HOA, they told me that there was a provision in the bylaws that said a car could only be parked in a visitor spot for a maximum of 72 hours, and that a board member submitted my car to a list of cars to be towed due to abusing a visitor's pass. They claim the bylaws text said that a car could only be parked in the visitor's lot for a total of 72 hours non-consecutively, i.e. if you park there once a week for 10 hours each week, we are in breach of the rule on the 8th week. This runs counter to the clause's obvious goal, which is to stop individuals from parking their cars in the lot. At the following HOA meeting, they flatly rejected my plea to get the $150 towing charge reimbursed. To cut a long story short, I filed a small claims lawsuit against them and was successful in recovering the towing charge as well as court costs, plus they hired an attorney, so I feel good about using some of their retainer as well. I can think of a handful, but the one that stands out in my mind is when they unilaterally changed the regulations to restrict street parking to less than 24 hours. The issue was that because of how the area was planned, street parking was expected to be the norm, and most homes only had one-vehicle garages. If you had any adolescent drivers in your family, it would be hard for you to park on the street since you would have 3 cars, one in your garage, one in your driveway, and one in the assigned spot in front of your house. If that wasn't awful enough, the night they made the change, they went around with parking infraction stickers in hand and stuck them to the windshields of all the vehicles that were now breaking the new laws. I had 3 roommates at the time, and 2 of us were parking on the street. One of them arrived home after hours and witnessed the incident, so we came up with a plan to acquire razors, remove the stickers, identify the HOA homes, and reposition the stickers. The HOA awoke to find their cars fully covered in their own parking violation stickers, so that's what we did. They never figured out who had done it. When the rest of the neighborhood learned about the new rule, they convened an emergency vote of no confidence and voted out the entire HOA board in order to install a new one. All this got started because the HOA president and VP were mad because their neighbors' kids were parking in front of their houses. Not even stealing other people's spots, just parking there. A-holes. When I lived in a condo and worked in property management, our HOA fired a former property manager for having an improper relationship with an employee, even though they were both adults and the relationship wasn't inappropriate. She wasn't his employer because he worked for the business through which we hired a service. Additionally, they are now wed. They didn't like her, so they used that as an excuse. Let's fast forward to the new employee. He enters, treats the staff members who had worked there for years like scum, fires them for absurd reasons, or switches their shifts to less attractive ones until they quit. He then went about replacing them with members of his family. After all of this, he manages to persuade the HOA that the 3 elevators, which were installed in the building in 2008, will need to be replaced within the next 10 years, and that we must urgently raise condo rates by 53% to pay for a $1.3 million elevator refurbishment. I laugh at this and mention how one of my buildings recently had all new elevators after replacing 7 for considerably less than $1.3 million. Additionally, the 7 elevators I replaced date back to the 1960s. Additionally, I point out that a cost estimate for the next 10 years is absurd and that no legitimate company would offer one because nobody can predict what cost will be in 10 years. No one pays attention, so they pass the increase. I learned from the concierge that his brother is the owner of the elevator business that gave the estimate. Within a month, we placed the condo up for sale. I've learned they since realized their mistake and fired him, but still, don't listen blindly. It wasn't my HOA, it was a neighboring one. I wasn't part of it. My lot was just closest to where the neighborhood boundary ended, run by this horrible HOA headed by an old jerk who had nothing better to do than walk around with a sloth and measure the length of the lawn. In general, I tried not to get out of the neighborhood, and my house was similar to those houses managed by this HOA. But in my backyard behind a high fence, I could do whatever I wanted without looking at possible conflicts with these idiots. But one day, the chairman, let's call him Duke for convenience, decided that he was totally bored. He thought that it was a genial idea to get into my backyard and find something to complain about. But Duke didn't know that I'm paranoid sometimes, and I have cameras in my backyard. Of course, Duke didn't find anything. I didn't call the cops for trespassing the first time, 'cause he hadn't done anything. But Duke wasn't so simple. I don't know what's in that Dot's head, but he snuck back onto my private property at night and brought a shovel and some bags, which turned out to be garbage. He decided to dig a hole and fill it with garbage and apparently file a complaint against me with the city for causing environmental damage on my private property. Apparently, he could not rest that he had no power over me. Of course, I noticed him because most of the time, 3 o'clock in the morning approximately, I do not sleep. I heard a strange noise, looked at what the cameras were showing, Duke had already picked up the place and started digging, and called the police. Long story short, Duke was taken away for trespassing and destruction of private property. The other board members apparently got tired of his idiocy and decided to make the incident an excuse to remove him from office. Now Duke has no power at all in the neighborhood, and all the neighbors are scolding him. P.S. Yeah, he had to pay me for ruining my lawn. Guys, thank you for all the support and likes. Subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed. See you next time.